something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear.
I think in the beginning it was like the idyllic scene that you'd want on a college campus. You know, everybody's carrying books. We didn't have backpacks in those days. We didn't have cell phones, so everybody's carrying a large number of books, and they're going to class, and they're meeting new people, and it's fun.
Penny loafers, and then the Oxford shoes. You remember the black and white shoes? And then if you were really dressed up, there was a place down on 4th Street that sold Papagalios or somebody's shoes, and you know, those were really cool.
So I showed up in '65 with, I just changed my haircut from a flat top to where I put when I had hair, I put a little, crease in it.
In the dormitories on Sunday, there was only one meal served that year in 1966, and it was the noon meal, and we girls had to wear a dress or skirt to the cafeteria if we wanted to have that one meal that was served that day, and the young men had to wear a coat and tie.
To the late 60s, it was like a whole different place. It just exploded.
Some people wore long skirts, some folks wore short skirts.
And then by 1970, we're wearing army jackets and blue jeans to class and wearing whatever we want and not even thinking we'd ask the professor.
There was a freedom. You know, you were supposed to look a certain way when you went into class when I first came. After a while, you could come to class any way you wanted to. People wear pajamas.
Every single person, and I mean everyone, smoked in the classroom. The professors occasionally complained, and smoke hung in the air thick like a bar. And I was not even a smoker, but I bought cigarettes and I carried them around for 2 years and blew out on them because I didn't want to be the only person not smoking in class.
And there was only about 18,000 students total, so it's a totally different campus. So fraternity life played a big thing in that, but there was a place called the Mug Club. That was a high place. Shipley's was a place a lot of people went to. Thursday night was a social night, if you will. So people went out on Thursday night, kind of blew off any homework or anything. And the other thing that was happening at that time was there was a very robust evening college. And we educated many people in the city who came back and would take 6, 7, 8 years to get a degree because they're taking 1 or 2 courses a night. And so you had this huge movement at 6, 7 o'clock at night of people leaving campus and 10,000 people coming to campus.
This campus, it would have been run down. It would have been run down. We had some building going up in the 1960s with dormitories, but by the 1970s, we were worn out. Buildings were falling apart. There was deferred maintenance. You know, it's why we went state. We needed that extra revenue that we could generate in order to improve the physical campus. I don't think you could see any difference between the physical campus and the city of Cincinnati. It's sort of all melded together then. But we had aging buildings, we had an aging stadium. We needed to change. And the students reflected that too, I believe.
My first year I was in the college education, but I really knew that it wasn't what I liked. And I was really watching a lot of things going on around the country. And so I decided I was going to get in political science. I remember having an opportunity to introduce former mayor of Cleveland, who's now deceased, Carl Stokes, first African-American mayor of any major city. And I got a chance to travel with him for a whole day, and he was really quite an impressive person, and that had an impact on me. I didn't know anything about political science. I just was a person who wanted to be involved in public service. I wanted to make change.
We were mostly middle class and working class white kids on this campus with 8 to 10% African Americans who came primarily from the Cincinnati schools. So it wasn't a really diverse campus. It certainly wasn't really diverse among the faculty ranks, and certainly not among the administrative ranks.
I think there was some real apprehension as a student here, because UC had a reputation of not being receptive of black students. You would hear that black students did not fare well when I entered in 1966. And one of the things you would quickly notice, you would notice not many black students. I don't think I had a black professor the whole time I was here.
America was going through such a cultural upheaval in the 60s that carried over into the 70s. It was not just the Vietnam War, it was the Civil Rights Movement, but it was also our leaders being assassinated, whether they were the social conscience of America, like Martin Luther King, or political leaders like the Kennedy brothers. America was in turmoil then, and that was being felt on college campuses all across the country. So in that sense, the University of Cincinnati was much like every place else in America, and the students were feeling this. They were feeling that they were being educated to change society, but that they were running into brick walls with that change sometimes.
The generation who preceded us, our parents, they had a certain rigid way of doing things, and for whatever reason, and I think the Beatles have a lot to do with this, the way they came on musically and the way they dressed. My generation got the idea that we could be a little different. We didn't have to mimic mom and dad, and we could have different ideas. Couple that with the ideas of the day, and you had people who were standing on the same campus who were 180 degrees different in what they thought.
The worst thing in the world is to have a classroom full of students and everybody thinks the same way. I mean, not only how boring, but how unproductive in their intellectual growth to not have students argue with each other.
You know, I came from a modest home, and so my exposure to things were pretty limited by the time I left high school. As I got involved here at the university, in many ways, my whole life opened up to so many different things that were really good for me. It helped me to grow.
They were faced with having to think about something else rather than just going to class, getting their degree, and getting a job. They were really questioning what the future was going to be for themselves after they left the university.
Vietnam was a very difficult and complex subject for all of us. And of course the draft was very much on people's minds because if you were enrolled in college, you were deferred from the draft, but as soon as you graduated, they would call you up. The problem with that, it was a socioeconomic divide and it was a racial divide. If you couldn't afford college, if you were poor, if you were black, and primarily if you were from the South, you tended to be sent to Vietnam.
You know, and I think there was a lot of fear about people being drafted and going to a war. I didn't believe in that war, you know. But the challenge was, well, you know, would I be a conscientious objector? And then how that got played out in the media, how it made you sort of feel unpatriotic, you know, and you know you're not like that, you know. So you're dealing with that, and you're dealing with some of the challenges relative to racism going on in the country, and, you know, how some of the people got vilified and called communists and, you know, all those things. And it was a really heavy experience, I think, for black students who were consciously involved in the social and civil rights movement of this country.
It became very contentious because more and more people felt that it was the wrong thing to do, that we were bombing innocent people, and there were pictures and stories, and it was the first time the war was on television. That's what really impacted people, because television made a huge difference in bringing the war into people's living rooms.
You know, every night they'd be talking about how many people were killed, and here's this action and that action, and you could see the carnage that was taking place.
I believe that's one of the things that began the anti-war movement, that began polarizing people, to watch actually some battles on television, to watch some of the carnage, to be able to see it made it more real, even though it was 3,000 miles away.
But over time, as the Vietnam War played out and civil rights played out, women's rights played out, gay rights played out, the campus changed dramatically in terms of being kind of a quiet Midwestern campus to being a place of great debate and discovery of new ideas.
At that time, too, the university had the TUC, the Tangeman University Center Bridge, and that was a common gathering place for everyone.
Well, the bridge came out of the back of Tangeman Center and connected up towards what I call the academic bridge, kind of straight up to McMicken Hall, and it was a place that you had to meander one way or the other to get to where you wanted to go, and so it became a place where people were talking about their issues, selling stuff.
We had the ubiquitous street preachers who would come onto campus there. We had people, student groups, gathering on campus to promote membership or activities or things like that.
Of course, they had to go through the procedures to get the right to do that, but they always didn't follow that, because if you were passionate about civil rights or women's rights or the war, you didn't necessarily say, oh, I'm going to follow somebody telling me I'm allowed to speak in these 3 square feet.
In good weather, at lunchtime particularly, that bridge was a mass of people. You could barely get through it.
You might have one speaker, and people would not only be on the bridge, they'd be on the road below the bridge in an amphitheater kind of a thing, and you'd have thousands of people sitting there listening to somebody speaking, and I'm not sure we have many of those opportunities today.
UC was typical of a lot of universities in that there was a detachment between the administration and the students. At the University of Cincinnati, Walter Langsam had been president since 1955. He was one of the old-style presidents. He liked the idea that students, alumni, parents would see him as a paternal figure. That didn't hold anymore by the late 60s. He liked the idea that maybe students would come over to his house on Sunday afternoons and his wife would serve them tea and be wearing her white gloves and all that. It was the old guard. And they were detached from what was going on in society, what was going on in higher education, and what was going on in their student lives. And this created a chasm between the student body and the administration. And I think Walter Langsam may have realized that his time had passed. He couldn't handle it. He was the old guard. He was from the Eisenhower era, and we were no longer living that way in the United States.
You know, it was pretty clear what was going on in the country during that time. There was many different news clips about racism taking place throughout America. That was, particularly my first year on the campus, a conversation that the black students we would have. We felt very isolated on the campus. We really didn't see anybody who looked like us. And so we too started talking about what are we gonna do about it? So at the end of my freshman year, in addition to worrying about getting through my first year of school, we had to take on these issues on the college campus. And it really gave me an opportunity to step out into a leadership role. We organized ourselves. It was called the United Black Association, and I became its first elected president. I led 30 or so students to Dr. Walter Langsam's office, and we basically sat on the floor in his office, and he sat behind his desk. And we presented demands to him, and you know, he looked at it and he said, well, you know, he'll get back with us. I think there was a great deal of concern about what if none of these demands are met? What if half of these demands are met? I particularly had concern. I did not believe in violence. And so for me, I was really kind of thrust in a leadership role. And by the way, I think Dr. King had just previously been assassinated, and I represented the university at his funeral. So there was a lot of tension around all of this. But surprisingly, the university accepted all the demands.
Yeah, I was fortunate to be involved in a lot of student activities and was president in a fraternity council right before this all played out. So I had a decent relationship with President Langsam and Bill Nestor. And I think it'd be fair to say that they weren't totally equipped to deal with something that never happened before. So I get that. I don't want to fault them.
Students were no longer accepting things coming down from the administration as the way things had to be. They were seeing themselves as having the power and the impetus and the influence to force some change upward. And that was an exhilarating thing as well. How they handled it, you can argue with that. How the administration handled it, you can certainly argue with that. But the administration was not equipped to deal with the Vietnam War, was not equipped to deal with political assassinations, and was not equipped to deal with enfranchising portions of the student body who had been ignored for decades and decades. And so that created a real breach between what you were doing in the classroom, what you were being told you could do in the classroom, and what you were doing in your life, and what campus life was going to be like. So yeah, it was a very difficult time. And Walter Langsam, the Board of Trustees, the higher administrative officials at the University of Cincinnati were not equipped to handle it.
It was clear that that style of presidency wasn't going to work beyond what had just happened. That kind of was a passing of the torch, not only on our campus, but to many other campuses, because they weren't trained or equipped or had ever experienced anything like that before. So they were learning on the go.
I think that what I'm most proud of is that we had that sense of consciousness to come together to challenge the establishment of the university, to make change, to say that we're human beings too, and we want to be treated as such, and that's important for us. I am very, very proud of what we were able to do, because we didn't know what was going to happen. We had no clue. But we've seen what happened in other places, and it wasn't so pretty. It wasn't so good. Even on black college campuses, kids got kicked out, And I really believed at the time I was graduating from high school that college was going to be the key to a better life for me. So you got all this on the table, but some of us just couldn't just be a student. We had to be a student of change.
It seared in my head, because it was also, my mom was in the hospital. I was with her when the news came.
I was going to class, 10 o'clock, and it was like, this commotion going on. It's like, Dr. King has been assassinated. I'm going like, what? It was so, you could feel the sadness in the room. And I would say that I might have been one of two blacks in the whole class. But you could feel that the white students in the class were very traumatized by it. The professor was very traumatized. He was pretty angry about it too. He stopped me after class, and we really didn't hold class. We talked for a little bit, and then he let the class go. And he said to me, I'm sorry this happened. And he says, I don't know if I want to stay in this country. I was very touched by his sensitivity. I was touched by the fact that the students themselves felt the sense of loss. And so the rest of the day, I can't tell you what happened. It was just a blur.
We all kind of just sat in bewilderment and amazement. And then the riots, started. And the destruction started.
It was a warm spring evening, and I wanted to go outside on the porch of the sorority house. And I said to some girls, "Come on, let's go outside. We'll just go out to the porch." And I didn't understand really why I couldn't go outside until I saw a police car driving down Clifton Avenue very slowly, and hanging out the back windows were rifles. And I said, "Whoa, I guess we're not going to go outside on the porch." And I realized at that moment something momentous had happened that probably was going to change my life in ways I couldn't understand at the time.
The day that Kent State happened, I was walking across campus and I ran into a female friend who was crying. And I said, "What's going on?" And she said, 4 students just got shot at Kent State and killed. And you could feel her pain, and you could feel the outrage spreading across the campus and eventually across the state, which led to us being closed for our last 6 weeks of school.
What happened at Kent State were that students, a large group of students gathered, and it was primarily to protest the escalation of the war in Cambodia. And there was a large group of students protesting, and there was a group of people who were not students who had also joined the campus and come onto the campus and were advocating burning down the ROTC building and advocating violence. Governor James Rhodes, in conjunction with the mayor of Kent, Ohio, decided to bring in the National Guard. The National Guard was another group of 19 and 20-year-olds who had really not had training in riot control. They had guns and they had bayonets on the guns, and unfortunately they had live bullets.
It was nonsensical to me that we would send troops on a college campus with loaded weapons because they're protesting against something.
Several of the National Guardsmen fired their weapons without having been given an order to fire. Later on, some believed that they had heard an order to fire, and other National Guards people said they did not hear that. It could be that one of them was hit with a rock or a bottle, because things definitely were being thrown at them while they had their fingers on the triggers. 4 students were killed and another 9 were injured that day. Kent State closed after that. A group went to the University of Miami and closed the University of Miami, and then Cincinnati reportedly was next, that the group was going to move to UC. And I got up one morning to go to class about 3 days later and was getting dressed, and I had the radio on, and I heard that the University of Cincinnati was closed. The administration called the professors up in the middle of the night and said, "If you want anything out of your office, go there now, because at 7 o'clock in the morning the campus will be sealed off." And so I got dressed anyway, and I actually took my books with me, and I walked up to campus because I had to see this. There were 20 police cars, they had yellow tape across, they basically were blockading it with police cars. My reaction was just like, whoa, how can this be? They never did reopen that spring, and so the last 5 weeks of class were lost, and my senior year just suddenly ended that morning.
The University of Cincinnati probably did the correct thing, knowing what had happened at Kent State, knowing that it could easily happen here. You still had Governor Rhodes. If he sent out the National Guard here, would they have learned from what happened at Kent State? I don't know that they would have in that short period of time. Probably to the university's credit, they shut things down.
What was interesting was we had commencement. A lot of people think we didn't have commencement. And I went to commencement. Many people didn't. They just left and started their life's work.
There had also been a speaking contest for the role of senior speaker. We were to prepare a 5-minute presentation, and I spoke on Kent State. I spoke about the importance of what happened in the Vietnam War, and I ended up being chosen to be the senior speaker. I was required to submit my speech to the administration, And I think in retrospect, they wanted to make sure that nothing radical or incendiary would be said. But the Dean of Women did call me up because when talking about Kent State, I used the word murdered. I said 4 students were murdered. And she asked me if I didn't want to rethink that and if I didn't want to change the language to killed rather than murdered. And I thought about it and I said, well, no, I didn't. I want to say that they were murdered. And I did leave that language in the speech, and I was allowed to give it in that way. I was a very young, naive 18-year-old girl when I arrived on campus. And I think the combination of all of those events and those world changes and my involvement in them, in addition to the very strong liberal arts education I was receiving at the same time, helped me put that together and make some sense out of it. And it changed me from a young Ohio girl into someone who wanted to then go around the world when I had the opportunity to grow and understand and learn about different cultures. And it made me a more mature person and a person willing to accept challenges.
You know, in some ways it's the best of times and sometimes the worst of times. The best in the sense that it gave me a chance to grow and face some of the issues that were not just on the campus, but throughout our society. And I keep doing that to this day. And the worst being facing racism and institutional racism and how that marginalizes human beings and deny them an opportunity to really become. So I got that chance, you know, and very appreciative of it.
I'm very glad I was in college during that time. Those changes were necessary. The change wasn't easy. It was rough in places and it was hard and lives were lost. But we've come out much better having gone through those changes, I believe.
I think the legacy is given to us by the times because of what happened in the times. We didn't do anything different than other students did on other campuses. But again, I wouldn't change my experience for all the world.
I think that the students of 50 years ago, class of 1970, would certainly have regrets, but would think themselves, I went through a time in America's life and in my life that I wouldn't trade for anything because I was on the cusp of change and I was witness to all of that. And we don't always get to witness things. In 68, 69, 70, they witnessed the tragedies of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy being assassinated. They witnessed the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. 1969, what happens then? A man walks on the moon. And not only that, he decides to come to the University of Cincinnati after he got back. You know, they were witnessing things going on in the world that I think for the last 50 years we haven't seen the like of. I've never thought we had a change in how bright students are. I think we've had a great change in what emphasis they put on different things in their lives. But the purpose of a university is to recognize how bright students are and that they can affect change. And the university's role is to create a pathway for them to make that change. That hasn't changed in 200 years in university thinking. So I think the question to ask people who graduated 50 years ago, were you able to pursue the path you wanted? And only they can answer that.
There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody's wrong. Young people speaking their minds are getting so much resistance from behind. Time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's growing.